In 2007, the UK had a GDP of 3.09 trillion US dollars. 15 years later, in 2022, the UK had a GDP of 3.09 trillion US dollars. That's the same number. This chart shows GDP per capita. That's our economic output divided by our population size. And up here in the right-hand corner, that's flat. In fact, GDP per capita today is lower than it was in 2007. Back then, the average Briton produced 50,397 US dollars of value a year. We're poorer today, we're less productive today. We produced just 48,866 US dollars each. Now, you can blame that on the 2008 financial crisis and on COVID. Those are here and here on the graph. But it's been 17 years since the US housing crisis, and that's starting to sound like an excuse. It also doesn't explain why the US, Germany, and France are all outperforming us on GDP growth. So what's the problem? Why won't the British economy grow? Unfortunately, the answer to that question suggests that there really isn't much hope for growth in Britain's future. This graph tells part of the story. It shows our economic output, or GDP, per hour, which is basically a measure of how much British workers get done in an hour of work. From 1979 to 2007, you can see this really clear, steady upwards trends as workers get better at doing more economically productive work. And then you hit this red line in 2008. This is the 2008 financial crisis. And this progress stops completely. You can see this completely flat section. And you can also see how well we should have been performing compared to what's actually happening. Productivity in the UK is 26% lower today than it would have been if it had followed the pre-financial crisis trend. And this trend is true across all of the sectors, which suggests that this is a problem across the board in the UK economy. It's not an industry-specific problem. And it's true that this is an issue for other European countries as well, but it's worse in the UK. This decline in GDP per capita and per hour is also falling, even though the fraction of working-age people who have jobs is higher than ever. So the problem is that this kind of work that we're doing and how effectively we're doing it. And it's not a problem of people not being employed. So what's going on here, right? When did we stop getting better at working? I think there are two core explanations. And one is a long-term trend, and the other explains this more recent stagnation. The long-term trend is deindustrialization. It used to be the case that working-class Britons worked in factories and mines. Now, a much higher percentage of working-class workers are employed in retail and services. And it is much easier to improve the efficiency of something like mining, shipbuilding, and factory work through improved technology than it is to make someone who works retail better at doing their job. A Tesco worker is going to be about as effective now as they were 50 years ago. So if more of our workforce is in these sectors that are harder to make more efficient, harder to improve, it's going to be harder to make gains in productivity. It is also going to be much easier for something like a developing country to improve its worker efficiency by reaching for lower hanging fruit like improving the literacy rate, which can dramatically improve worker output in a short period of time. An advanced economy will need advanced technology to make similar kinds of gains. The other explanation is that the UK has extremely low levels of investment compared to other economies in Europe. Investment is needed to drive improvements in infrastructure and technology that would make our workers more productive. And this really gets at the heart of the issue. Yes, workers are getting less productive over time, but a lot of that is because we don't have the investment that would drive innovation and improve productivity. So even ignoring this question of worker productivity, we can't have a discussion about the UK's poor growth without addressing the core problem of investment, which is probably the biggest problem in the British economy. This chart shows the share of GDP represented by investment. and the UK is this yellow line. And since about the mid-90s, you can see that it's lagged far behind France, Germany, and the US. The overall investment rate in the UK collapsed in the 90s. Investment accounted for about 23% of GDP in the 1980s, but from 2000s onwards has hovered around 17%. Meanwhile, other G7 countries typically have an investment percentage around 20 to 25%. Here's more data that's going to illustrate this problem. This is a report from the LSE and from the Centre for Economic Performance, and it breaks down the factors that cause a fall of productivity since the 2008 financial crisis. And I want you to pay attention to this much larger blue portion. That represents the loss in productivity due to falling capital. In other words, due to a reduction in investment in the economy. And you can see, on these other factors like skills and TFP, which is total factor production, it's not that important. But on those other two areas, the UK isn't dramatically different from other countries, right? Our loss in skills is kind of similar to the US. Total factor production is actually less of an issue here than in France, for example. But the big problem for us is this loss of investment. So we have much lower private sector investment than the rest of the world, but we also have far lower public sector investment. And this is basically government spending on things that should improve economic growth, like infrastructure, like maybe improving our electricity system. This has also been falling in the UK for a long time. Thatcher government privatizations in the 1980s took public sector investment down from an average of 4.5% from 1949 to 1978 to an average of 1.5% between 1979 and the present day. And we also had massive public spending cuts in response to the 2008 financial crisis. All of this means that over the last 4 decades, we have had the lowest rate of public sector investment in the G7. For reference, the rest of the G7 countries average 3.4% in public sector investment, so much closer to the numbers that we had before 1978. Okay, so why does any of this matter? What's wrong with having a low rate of investment? Investment is the key driver of economic growth. It's needed to improve roads and schools, fund new businesses, and accelerate technological innovation. If levels of both public sector and private sector investment remain low, there's absolutely no way an economy can grow. It's just a non-negotiable. And the clearest example of this investment black hole is the weak performance of the UK's secondary cities. If you live in London, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the British economy is doing reasonably well, because Greater London eats up about 36% of the foreign investment that comes into the UK and accounts for a large portion of both GDP and productivity. But if you leave London, it's a very different story. The North East, North West, Yorkshire and the Humber all collectively accounted for just 14% of foreign investment coming into the UK. And that's a gigantic disparity for a portion of the country that is very large. And there's no real path forward for economic growth if cities like Glasgow, Manchester, and Birmingham remain so unproductive. And the reality is that British cities, compared to cities in other parts of the world, are just economically feeble. I think that comparison is really important, because if you compare the British economy to somewhere like Germany, and you look outside of Berlin, look at Munich, look at Frankfurt, those cities are an incredibly important part of the German economy. I'll read you something from the Centre for Cities report that I think really illustrates this argument. It says there are 112 cities in the G7 the size of Nottingham or larger, but out of the bottom 20 for productivity, 7 are British. They are in effect the sick men of the G7, with the recent study of London adding to the UK's woes. The report also indicates that the UK ranks the lowest in the G7 for industries that rely on staff with digital skills. So cities outside of London aren't getting investment, and their productivity falls off a cliff as a result. So we know that investment is a problem, but why have we arrived at this point where investment in the UK is so low? As always, there are going to be way more factors than I could possibly fit into one reasonably long video, but I'm going to pick 2 that I think are really crucial. The first is just how difficult it is to build in the UK. Land and building regulations are extremely complicated, and construction costs in the UK are much higher than in other European countries. And this becomes a massive problem because in order for investment of any kind to have any real economic effect, it normally needs to be put to work building things like roads, factories, or property developments. And high construction costs are going to slow down and sometimes halt a lot of profitable investments in the UK. Higher construction costs are going to eat into investor returns for basically everything, driving them to countries with less red tape and cheaper materials. And the other major factor is political uncertainty. And by political uncertainty, I basically mean Brexit. Right? The UK used to get a lot of foreign direct investment because it served as what's called an export platform. Basically, companies from Asia would open up shop and invest in the UK because they saw it as a way to gain access to the European market. So, for example, we had a lot of Japanese firms that used the UK as a base and then supplied the European single market. But that's clearly no longer an incentive to invest in the UK because we don't have free trade with the European Union. And export tariffs to the European Union are also going to eat into the profits of any business looking to export to a European customer base, reducing the appeal of those investments in the eyes of investors. But we've also got factors that are political as well, like the post-2008 austerity policies that are going to be a major factor in this, right? So we talked about how low public spending is in the UK, and cuts to public spending were never really reversed when we came out of the austerity policies used in response to the 2008 financial crisis. And that's the main reason why today public investment is so low. But this doesn't just affect the levels of public investment in the UK, it also creates lower expectations of government spending among investors. So if investors see that the government isn't going to spend money, they know that's not going to stimulate economic growth, and so they're just not going to see very much upside in the British economy. And this is the reality, right? The British economy has few clear advantages. We don't have access to good trading markets, our technology, our levels of education aren't better than comparable European countries. So we need something clear that's going to attract foreign investors. The problem is it's really hard to see where investment in the future comes from. I mean, there used to be interest to provide investment from China, the Belt and Road Initiative, but our relationship with the US made it difficult for us to sign on to that agreement, and foreign direct investment from Asia really has dried up. There's a massive budgetary black hole that the current government is facing, so I don't think it's likely that we're going to get a significant increase in public spending. And really the fundamentals aren't there for the government to spend tons of money. We don't have a particularly large tax base, our incomes aren't increasing, so it's unclear where governments would get the money to be able to spend. They could borrow money, but our debt burden is pretty large already. So if we don't have access to foreign investment, and if the government isn't in position to spend much more money, I think this problem of chronically low investment is going to continue to be a problem for the British economy in the future. I just do not see any kind of straightforward, easy solution to this as the fundamental problem of the British economy. I do think prospective policies designed to streamline land and construction regulations could be particularly promising. If we can make it cheaper to build things in the UK, I think that could have a significant effect on attracting investment. But that major problem of lacking foreign investment and lacking the ability to spend lots of government money means I just don't think there's much scope for the British economy to grow.